I was looking down in this section at the far-flung correspondents and the demanders. The demanders are the ones who wrote for video on demand, and several of them are here this year. I see Gerardo Valero from Mexico, Omar Mosafar from Chicago. I see Krishna Shenoy from India, and I see Pablo Villasá from Brazil. I see, I'm sorry, I'm not mentioning Jaina Monji and several. I have one story to tell about, and the reason I was looking and noticing them is because one of the works that you've seen, the trailer before the film, with the thumbs up trailer, was made by one of our, what we call the far-flung correspondents, one of our FFCs. Michael Mirasol, who now lives in Australia, made that thumbs up trailer about Roger. And I know that Michael is watching us via the streaming. Actually, I wish we weren't streaming. Sometimes you just like to keep some things like right for the house. But, to have 15 or 14 years of Roger on that iPad app is going to be, it's just so precious. So thanks for filming all these years. And that was, some of the years, the Shattered Glass guys. I really have to thank you, and the University of Illinois College of, thank you. That's Brett and Luke, thank you. So the story about Krishna is Roger, as you know about a lot of the stories told, if you write to him, he writes back. Even though hundreds of letters, thousands of letters, he writes back. If you send it by internet, not if you, send it by mail, although some people in the old days with the typewriters, someone is here, Dana Stevens. Where are you, Dana? I think she, with Slate magazine, and she actually had a letter that Roger wrote to her when she said she was like maybe 12 years old or something, and she has the typewritten letter with the keystrokes off on some of the type from the typewriter. But Krishna started sending Roger letters and writing and videos that he had done, and Roger would show them to me. He would say, there's this kid in India, and he's making this inventive, look at this, look at the special effects that he created, not on computer, but he sets them up and he does this and he colors them in by hand and he arranges these action figures, or some of them were horror movies and some were this and that, and we watched them over the years. And one year, Krishna wrote to us and said that he and his parents were going to come to Ebertfest and visit. I think he was going to come with his father. And he was all excited. I don't think he had ever been to America. And our film festival was it's always in April. And very sadly, Krishna's dad passed away just, I think, maybe a month or two before they were going to come. And we thought that he was going to cancel the trip. But his uncle said, no, this is what your dad would really want you to do. You must go and see the film festival of this Roger Ebert, who's been so encouraging of your work. So Krishna and his mom and sister came to visit us, and we had such a good time, and they've been coming every year. And Krishna is so talented. You should go to his website. I forget the name of it right now, but we'll give it to you later. And Krishna decided one of his idols was Steven Spielberg. And so Krishna made a 1-minute film tribute to Steven Spielberg. And Spielberg, and this was like last month, I think, Spielberg was so impressed with it, he wrote Krishna a letter that I think Krishna is going to frame. And I wish we could show, I don't know, We're showing it tomorrow at the panel. Great. All right. You know, I have to tell you, Nate Cohen said that I spring too many of these surprises on. Oh, I wish we could do all the 70-millimeter movies. And he said, do you know how long it takes to load those 70-millimeter movies? We wouldn't be able to do a whole bunch of them, and maybe there are not a lot of them good enough to show anymore. So I said, well, you know. So he said, maybe we should talk about it before you say that. But you know, I guess I'm getting more and more like my husband, who would just spring on a surprise every day. Just say anything. He was just so enthusiastic about life, and he didn't care, and he would, you know, purport to give away legal rights to something to have our lawyers sweating. Roger, you can't do that. You know, you have to talk to us before you say you're giving away the rights to your memoir. You can't do that. The publishing company owns that. Well, he just sent out a tweet to 800,000 people that that's what he's going to do, and we have to, you know, go back and retract some of that stuff. So anyway, Roger, you've had a great influence on me. Today, we are having, I'm excited because whenever we have David Bordwell at the film festival, it just feels right. He is so smart. He's so, you know, I was saying the depth of his knowledge, this is what Roger and I always said about David Bordwell. He's so knowledgeable about film, history. He's such a film scholar, but he does it in a way that makes it accessible to the audiences. And when you're with him, not only do you learn something, you're really happy about learning it because he conveys it so enthusiastically. Roger said we should write out a slip giving David Bordwell a lifetime pass to Ebertfest. And so please help me welcome the film historian from the University of Wisconsin, David Bordwell.
Thank you. That's very nice. First thing I have to say, of course, is I'm sorry I wasn't here the opening night and the following day. I had duties at our own film festival, the guest speaker that I was obligated to, so I couldn't come. And normally my wife, Kristen Thompson, would be with me, and she can't come at all this time because of her other duties. So first, her apologies, my apologies for being late and missing some of the fun that first night especially. But also, just a quick mention of I've written several things on the web, and I've talked to a couple reporters, and one of the striking things is every time someone asks me about Roger, I think, well, I've kind of said all I have to say, really, I think, and then I remember something else, because this was a man of so many dimensions, so many layers of depth, and of feeling, of intellect, and character, that it's almost inexhaustible. When you start to call to mind things that he said and wrote, all I know is that after making his acquaintance, almost every movie I saw, I thought, what would Roger think of it? And by the end, and I know many other people felt the same way. Fortunately, he usually had written about it already, so it was not a question of knowing what he would think. But then, as he began to write more and more personally and more reflectively about life and science, art, morality, on the internet, politics, a whole range of subjects, now it's almost any subject, any area of life that I encounter, I find myself wondering, I wonder what Roger would say about that. And to me, that's the real mark of an unusual and extraordinary person. So that's what I had to say. He asked me if I would introduce this movie and participate in the Q&A, and of course I'm very happy to do that. I just want to give you a quick introduction of the kind of thing I think he would want us to know about and frame. Of course, he's talked about it in the essay that you have in the catalog, so I'll try to just flesh in a couple of points that he's made. I think one way to think about this movie is that it's an intersection of two forces, really. On the one hand, the original story, which is based on a folk legend, a legend called Uba Sute, which means Oba meaning old person, usually a woman, Sute meaning rejection. So it's sometimes translated vulgarly as dumping granny. But it's about a custom of sending old folks out of a village, especially in times of hardship when food is scarce, to die in a remote area, usually a mountain. Now, there's a lot of debate about whether such a custom ever existed in Japan, but there's a tremendous folk literature about this custom, and there's a suspicion that actually it grew up out of almost the idea, the prospect of this in times of famine, but it's not clear that it was ever actually practiced. Nevertheless, as I say, there is a folk legend about it, and it permeates oral literature as well as the written type for centuries in Japan. A famous no play by Sayami is about this. But the one that concerns us most, the version that concerns us most, is a short story, kind of an extended short story, by Shichiro Fukuzawa, published in 1956. It was a rather controversial story, and we can talk about that afterwards if you want. But it got a great deal of notice. He had never written anything substantial before. It was his debut work, and it immediately won him a very prestigious place in Japanese letters. It was a fierce controversy about the story, but it was kind of a scandal, and in fact, some of his subsequent writings were even more scandalous. It was, contrary to what people tell you, I think it was a kabuki play. At least as near as I can tell, it was turned into a kabuki play the year after its publication. That would have been 57. But it's not clear that whether the kabuki play was not almost a dry run for the film you're going to see. I'm still researching that. But there was a short-lived stage version of this novel. And then eventually we have, a year later, in 58, we have the film you're going to see, by Kinoshita Kinosuke. That's the second line of convergence I just wanted to mention. You know, in Japanese cinema, we have an interesting sort of dynamic. On the one hand, there are a lot of directors who are, we might say, purists. They've decided a certain approach to cinema that they're going to take, and they pursue it very rigorously. The classic example is Ozu, whose films have an undeniable stylistic signature. 2 minutes into an Ozu film, you say, I've never seen anybody film this way. And to probably a little lesser extent, another great director, Kenji Mizoguchi, has the same thing. These guys are absolute in the way they think of cinema. It always comes from the same perspective. But then there are very eclectic directors who try lots of different things. And Kinoshita is one of those, for sure. He's got a very varied filmography. He's worked in almost every genre. I mean, everything from tearjerkers to juvenile delinquent films, historical films, swordplay films. He's done a lot of different kinds of things. And Kinoshita is a contemporary of Kurosawa. They began at almost exactly the same time, and they pursued their careers in parallel paths, though Kinoshita was much less famous overseas than Kurosawa, as I think you know. I would recommend one other Kinoshita film to you. There are many good ones that I'm aware of, and I haven't seen all of his films. But the one that I would recommend most highly is one called 24 Eyes, which I think probably some of you have seen. It's available in many forms on DVD. It's on streaming on Hulu Plus through the Criterion Collection. It's an extraordinary movie, and I have to say, bring your Kleenex. So Kinoshita is a pretty eclectic director. Tries lots of different approaches to cinema. This is probably his most experimental film, because what he does, and again, Roger talks about this, is make a movie that is halfway between theater and cinema. And more specifically, in terms of what theater it's in, is the kabuki. He uses the conventions of that Japanese theater tradition in a sort of a filmic way, but he's constantly alluding to the theatrical dimension of the story. So you'll see painted backdrops, you'll hear kabuki-style music, you'll see an emphasis on visual spectacle, because kabuki is a very splendid theater. It's a rapturous, sensuous kind of theater. So you'll see that there's a real play with color, light, costume, and so on. In some ways, I think, even the wide screen helps, because as you probably know, the kabuki stage is a very wide stage, but very narrow. So it's very much like the cinemascope aspect ratio that he's using. The film's also notable, not just for its halfway between theater and film status, but it's also notable because of its richness of theme. And Roger touches on this as well in his note. One of the questions I think you'll want to ask at the end of the film is, what exactly is the attitude we're supposed to take toward what we see? Because the film has a kind of richness of perspective about how we might interpret this. Certainly the play was, the original story was interpreted a lot of different ways. And some of that ambiguity, I think, carries over into the film that we're going to see. There was a big debate in the Japanese press about both the original story and the film, and among audiences. The last thing I have to say is this, and I simply leave you with this. You probably know that this essay, which is in the catalog, is Roger's last essay for his Great Movies series. And I'm told by Nate Cohen that 3 weeks before his death, Roger asked that this movie be added to our schedule. So it was fitted into the schedule as the last choice, very last minute in a way. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoy the movie.